Welcome to the deep dive. We take a whole stack of sources, articles, research, notes, and really try to pull out the key insights for you.
And today we're doing something, well, a bit different. We're focusing entirely on one single day, August 19th, 2025.
It was an absolutely packed day. I mean, it really shows how much can change, how interconnected things are, just in 24 hours.
Exactly. So our mission here is to help you navigate all that information from that specific date, sort of cut through the noise, make sense of the global tapestry, if you will.
Get straight to what matters. And we've got a lot to cover, right?
We do everything from media accountability, big legal stuff there,
To international conflicts, U.S. domestic policy shifts.
infrastructure issues, public health scares, environmental challenges. It was all happening.
Okay, let's dive in. Where should we start? Maybe with the media landscape. There was some significant legal news that day.
Yeah, let's kick off there. It ties into that ongoing theme of accountability, especially after the 2020 U.S. election.
So what happened on the 19th specifically?
Well, Newsmax agreed to pay Dominion Voting Systems, the voting machine company.
Right.
They agreed to pay them $67 million to settle a lawsuit.
67 million. Wow. And this was over their reporting on the 2020 election.
Exactly. Promoting narratives that were, well, proven false.
And this wasn't the first big settlement like this, was it?
Yeah,
I seem to remember Fox.
you're right. Good memory. Just over 2 years prior, in 2023, Fox Corporation settled a similar lawsuit with Dominion. That one was for over $787 million.
787 million. These figures are just staggering.
They really are. And the
Yeah.
insight here, I think, is that these cases are setting a real precedent
There's a precedent for
for
it.
the financial consequences of broadcasting, misinformation, especially when it hits at the core of democratic processes.
So there are actual, tangible costs,
Mm.
financial and maybe reputational.
Definitely. Financial and reputational. It pushes this whole debate forward, media integrity versus feels of a chilling effect on journalism. It's a tricky balance.
That idea of accountability, it definitely echoes in other areas too. Let's shift focus a bit. Look inside the U.S. August 19th saw some important domestic developments. Governance, public perception, even infrastructure.
Yeah, a lot going on domestically. For instance, there was a development with the National Guard.
Okay, what was that?
2 more Republican governors, Mississippi and Louisiana, announced they were sending their National Guard troops to Washington, D.C.
Adding to troops already there.
Right. It pushed the total deployment to over 1,800 troops. This was to support President Trump's expanding federal law enforcement presence there.
Amid protests and tensions in D.C.
Yeah.
But not everyone agreed.
No. Vermont's Governor Phil Scott, he actually declined the request publicly.
So what does this kind of deployment mean for, say, people living in D.C. or for the broader political conversation?
Well, it certainly fueled the debate about federal power versus state or district autonomy. Some saw it as necessary for maintaining order.
But
Others, particularly D.C. leaders and civil rights groups, raised alarms, big alarms about federal overreach, militarization.
concerns about civil liberties, I imagine.
Exactly, especially in that kind of tense environment.
And sticking with domestic U.S. issues, there were also some cultural sparks flying, something involving the Smithsonian.
Yes, that same day, President Trump ramped up his public criticism of the Smithsonian Institution.
What was his specific criticism?
He claimed its exhibits focused too much on how bad slavery was. That was the, quote, making headlines.
Okay. And the reaction? Predictably strong.
Oh, immediate. Historians, museum professionals, commentators, everyone weighed in. It really tapped into those deeper societal divides we see.
So conservative groups maybe supported his view.
They tended to seize on that narrative, yeah. While educators and museum folks, they defended the mission, the need to teach the difficult parts of history, even the uncomfortable truth.
It's a constant tension, isn't it? How we remember and present the past.
Definitely. And also on August 19th, a significant move on immigration policy.
What happened there?
The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, announced a partnership with Nebraska. They're converting a facility called the Work Ethic Camp in McCook.
Work at the camp.
Yeah. Converting it into an ICE detention facility, immigration and customs enforcement.
And they gave it a new name.
They did. It's being branded as the Cornhusker Clink.
The Cornhusker Clink. Okay. That's memorable. How much capacity does this add?
It adds roughly 200 to 280 beds. The idea is for it to be a sort of Midwest hub for ICE detention.
And the rationale versus the criticism.
Well, supporters argue it's just necessary. Caseloads are up. But critics, they point to potential due process risks. lack of transparency.
And using public resources for detention instead of other things.
Exactly. It signals a broader push, it seems, to increase detention capacity nationwide, which is, always a contentious issue.
And while that's happening, federal workers themselves face some uncertainty. So we'll go at job protections.
Yeah, related to the workforce itself. An appeals court panel showed, let's say, skepticism.
Skepticism about what?
About a lower court's ruling. That ruling had ordered the reinstatement of about 17,000 federal workers who were fired while on probation.
17,000. That's a huge number. So what's the implication if the appeals court sides against reinstatement?
Well, the core insight here is that this could really shift the balance of power. It could set a major precedent on how much leeway a president has to reshape the federal workforce quickly.
And how much power workers have to challenge those kinds of big systemic actions.
Precisely. It's a really critical case for the future structure and stability of the civil service.
Okay, moving from policy to, well, physical events.
Yeah.
There was a major incident in Baltimore Harbor that day, too, wasn't
Yes, a big explosion on a cargo ship. It was carrying coal just leaving the harbor.
An explosion. Was anyone hurt?
Remarkably, no injuries reported, which is pretty amazing, actually.
That is lucky. But coming after the Key Bridge collapse the previous year, that must have raised concerns.
Oh, absolutely. The timing, the location, it immediately amplified worries about port safety, about infrastructure vulnerabilities in general.
So calls for investigations, safety reviews.
Immediately. And it just reignited that whole debate about whether U.S. infrastructure investment is adequate, especially for these crucial economic hubs.
And speaking of economics, closer to the consumer level, Home Depot made an announcement that day.
They did. They signaled that price hikes were coming on various consumer goods.
And they linked it to?
Directly to the new tariffs, the ones President Trump's administration put on imported materials.
So a direct line from trade policy to checkout prices.
Pretty much. And consumer advocates were immediately warning about the impact, especially on, lower and middle income families.
And economists were debating the bigger picture. Inflation, growth.
Exactly. It threw fuel on that ongoing debate about protectionism versus free trade and the real-world consequences.
Okay, one more domestic item before we go global. Leadership changes at the Pentagon.
That's right. The Air Force announced its Chief of Staff, General David Allvin, planned to retire early, around November 1st.
How far into his term was he?
Only about halfway through his expected 4-year term. So, pretty significant.
Is this unusual or part of a bigger trend?
It seems to be part of a broader reshuffle, yeah. Within the Pentagon's senior ranks under the Trump administration's second term.
So what kind of questions does an early departure like that raise?
Big questions, really, about policy continuity, especially on things like military modernization, force readiness, even the service culture within the Air Force.
And finding a replacement won't be straightforward?
Likely not. You can probably expect a contentious confirmation fight for whoever gets nominated next.
Okay, so a lot happening domestically. Let's broaden out now. The international stage was just as intense on August 19th. Conflicts, diplomacy, where do we start? Russia, Ukraine.
Yeah, that's a key one. Russia launched a massive attack that day, their largest missile and drone barrage since July.
Nearly 300 projectiles, I read. What were they targeting?
Primarily Ukraine's energy infrastructure. A major escalation.
And this came just as there were whispers about potential peace talks.
Exactly. Kind of strange timing, wasn't it? Reports were circulating that President Trump was trying to set up a summit. Putin and Zelensky. Maybe in Budapest.
But Trump himself expressed doubts, while still exploring options.
Right. He repeated he wouldn't send U.S. ground troops, but also voiced skepticism about Putin actually wanting a deal. Yet, he was apparently looking into U.S. air support for Kyiv, security guarantees. A complex picture.
How did Ukraine and Europe react to all this?
Well, Ukrainian officials confirmed the attack, obviously, as Zelensky called the talks a strong signal. But, there's deep skepticism about Russia's sincerity.
And European leaders?
They voiced concern, particularly about Trump's maybe softening stance towards Russia, worried it could embolden Moscow, undermine unity.
Interesting. And you mentioned markets reacted.
Yeah.
How so?
Yeah, crude oil prices actually dipped slightly on the 19th, despite the attack. It seems investors were weighing those headlines about potential ceasefire talks, however tentative. It lowered the perceived risk premium, just for a bit, shows how sensitive markets are to geopolitical whispers.
Fascinating. Okay, moving to another hotspot, Gaza. What was the situation there on August 19th?
A mix of faint hope and brutal reality. Hamas signaled what they called a positive response to new 60-day ceasefire proposals.
Boy, there's always a but, it seems.
But the 24 hours before that announcement saw heavy Israeli airstrikes. At least 60 people killed, over 300 injured. A really grim backdrop.
Who's mediating these talks?
Qatar has really stepped up. They're emphasizing the urgency of a comprehensive ceasefire.
What are the main roadblocks?
It's incredibly complex. Israeli officials are wary, citing security threats. Humanitarian groups are just desperate for relief to get through.
And internal politics play a role, too.
Hugely. You have far-right Israeli ministers who oppose any deal that doesn't mean total defeat for Hamas. And Hamas rejects terms they see as surrender. Meanwhile, the violence just devastates civilian life and infrastructure.
In the aid situation.
Still critical. Aid officials were warning supplies entering Gaza were nowhere near enough to prevent widespread hunger. That puts immense pressure on the negotiations.
Such a difficult situation. Let's shift to the Korean Peninsula. More tensions there.
Yes. Kim Jong-un's sister, who's very influential,
Right.
she publicly denounced the South Korean President Lee Jae-myung
For what reason?
for, in her words, talking peace while participating in war rehearsals, referring to U.S.-South Korea military drills.
And this came alongside other warnings from the North.
Yes. North Korea warned of reprisals, and Kim Jong-un himself was calling for a faster nuclear buildup.
So what does this tell us?
It really highlights the fragility of the situation. It puts a planned U.S. ROK summit, that's Republic of Korea, under strain, and it underlines that constant dilemma in the region, deterrence versus dialogue. Which path is safer?
A perennial question there. Now, moving to Africa, Nigeria saw violence that day, too.
Tragically, yes. A deadly attack at a mosque in northwestern Nigeria during morning prayers. At least 13 people killed by unidentified gunmen.
Just horrific. Is this part of a pattern?
It fits within Nigeria's really challenging security landscape, unfortunately, often involving complex religious and ethnic conflicts.
And the international reaction?
Condemnation, of course.
Yeah.
And renewed calls for Nigeria and the global community to do more to protect vulnerable populations there.
And one more tragic event related to regional instability, Afghanistan.
Yes, late on August 19th, a bus carrying Afghans who had been expelled from Iran crashed near Herat. It burst into flames.
Oh no, high casualties.
Reports indicated a high death toll, many injuries, just awful.
What are the likely repercussions of something like that?
It's almost certain to intensify scrutiny, diplomatic, humanitarian, on the whole practice of deportation in that region and on the, frankly, inadequate support systems for people being returned. It's a human tragedy highlighting systemic failures.
Okay, let's pivot now to environmental and public health challenges. August 19th was significant here, too. Hurricane Erin was looming large.
It certainly was. A massive storm, over 600 miles wide. It was posing a serious threat to the Outer Banks, much of the southeast coast.
Were evacuations ordered?
Yes, mandatory evacuations in parts of North Carolina, other coastal areas. They were bracing for potentially life-threatening storm surge, dangerous rip currents.
Did it make landfall?
It mostly stayed offshore, thankfully. But even offshore, a storm that size.
It still causes major problems.
Absolutely. Forecasters warn of life-threatening surf, strong rip currents, significant beach erosion all the way up the coast. Carolinas, Mid-Atlantic, even the Northeast.
And does a storm like Erin connect to bigger climate discussions?
It inevitably does. The size, the strength. It feeds into those growing worries about worsening climate patterns. It leads to calls for better disaster preparedness, more investment in making coastlines resilient.
Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Europe was dealing with the aftermath of extreme heat, Spain's wildfires.
Right. On the 19th, there was some slightly better news there. Authorities reported Spain's largest fires had finally stabilized.
What help?
Cooler temperatures finally arrived after this brutal 16-day heat wave. That heat wave had caused fires that burned almost as much land as the entire previous year's fire season.
Incredible. So what's the takeaway from Spain's experience?
It really underscores how these extreme heat events are changing the game for wildfire risk in Europe. It's straining budgets, forcing countries to rethink forest management, and highlighting the need for better cross-border cooperation on firefighting.
And the U.S. wasn't immune to heat either. The Southwest.
No, definitely not. On that same day, August 19th, the National Weather Service issued excessive heat warnings for Southern California, lasting through the week.
Where was it worst?
Interior valleys, desert communities.
Yeah.
Really baking.
And the impact, beyond just being uncomfortable.
It strains infrastructure, power grids. It strains public health systems. And critically, it elevates wildfire risk dramatically. Fire managers were warning. Just one spark in those conditions could lead to disaster. These heat waves are getting longer, hotter. It's a clear trend.
Okay, shifting to a specific public health issue. Legionnaire's disease in New York City.
Yes, unfortunately, the ongoing outbreak there claimed its fifth victim by August 19th.
5 deaths. That's serious.
It really is, and it highlights potential vulnerabilities, doesn't it, in urban infrastructure, like building water systems where Legionella can grow.
So it points to a need for faster intervention, preventative measures.
Exactly, and it raises questions about regulatory oversight. Are the checks and balances strong enough to prevent these kinds of outbreaks?
And another, maybe more unusual, public health warning that day. Something about shrimp.
Yes, radioactive shrimp. The FDA issued a warning.
Radioactive how? Where were they sold?
Sold at Walmart locations, according to the warning. The report suggested the contamination originated from international sources, places with potentially less stringent environmental controls.
Wow. What does an incident like that reveal?
Well, it shines a spotlight on supply chain vulnerabilities, doesn't it?
That's it.
And the challenge of overseeing imported goods effectively. It obviously causes consumer anxiety
I'll say.
and leads to renewed calls for stricter import checks, more transparency in food safety. You want to know where your food comes from and that it's safe.
Absolutely. Now, globally, Pakistan was facing a natural disaster too, flooding.
Yes, devastating floods. On August 19th, flood emergencies were declared in several southern districts. This was happening while search and rescue was still ongoing in the Northwest.
Or earlier floods.
Right, where flash floods had killed hundreds just the week before. A terrible situation.
And the response efforts.
Severely hampered.
Right.
Damaged roads, bridges, resource shortages. It really highlights the limits of preparedness, both locally and globally. It just adds urgency to the calls for climate adaptation measures.
Such widespread impact from climate-related events. But there was some positive public health news that day. From Texas.
Yes, a bit of relief. Texas declared an end to a major measles outbreak. It had been the nation's largest in decades.
How long did it last?
They declared it over after 42 days with no new cases, but it wasn't without cost.
Fatalities, infections.
Sadly, yes. 2 children died, and somewhere between 700 and 760 people were infected during the surge, which lasted months.
So even though it ended, it leaves questions.
Definitely. It's bound to refuel debates about school immunization rules, the impact of vaccine misinformation, and whether we're funding public health enough to respond quickly and effectively to outbreaks like this.
Okay, let's wrap up our look at August 19th, 2025, with a glance at the economy and labor. Wall Street seemed a bit uncertain that day.
Yeah, mixed signals is a good way to put it. U.S. stocks were pulled in different directions.
How so?
The Dow Jones actually touched a record high briefly. It was boosted by some strong retail earnings like Home Depot, which we mentioned earlier.
But not everything was up.
No. The Nasdaq fell. Big tech stocks like Nvidia and Microsoft slid. Although Intel had a good day. It jumped after news of a $2 billion investment from SoftBank.
So what were investors focused on? What was driving the mood?
A lot of anticipation, really. Looking ahead to the Federal Reserve's Jackson Hole Symposium later that week, that's where big policy hints often get dropped.
So waiting for signals about interest rates, the economy?
Exactly. The market was kind of caught between hoping for a soft landing, inflation cools without a recession, and worrying about when the Fed might actually cut rates or if they'd have to tighten more.
And global markets reflected this uncertainty.
Yeah, European and U.S. stocks kind of diverged. Oil prices fell, as we discussed. It just shows how sensitive everything is to both geopolitics and these central bank signals.
Okay, and finally, a resolution in a labor dispute. Air Canada.
Yes, that wrapped up on the 19th. Air Canada started getting its service back to normal after its flight attendants ended their strike.
Was it a high-profile strike?
It was, yeah. Got quite a bit of attention. The agreement came after mediated talks finally resumed and reached a conclusion.
What are the broader implications of that settlement?
Well, it certainly sparked more discussion about working conditions for airline staff, and maybe wider labor trends, too. You can bet that settlement is being looked at very closely by unions and management at other airlines across North America. Could set a kind of benchmark.
So looking back at this, one day, August 19th, 2025, It's just incredible, the sheer range of events.
It really is, from courtrooms deciding media futures to diplomatic tightropes in conflict zones to hurricanes and heat waves impacting communities.
To decisions affecting workers' rights, consumer prices, public health, it's all woven together.
It truly showcases the complexity, doesn't it? How interconnected our world is, how quickly things can shift.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe a final thought for you, our listener.
Yeah, thinking about all these different threads from just one day,
Yeah.
is there a single theme or connection that stands out most to you? What ties some of these disparate events together in your mind?
And maybe more importantly, how do you think a day packed like August 19th, 2025 might continue to ripple outwards, affecting the days, the weeks, maybe even the years to come? Something to mull over.